Hello and a very warm welcome to LearnShed Live. I'm Jo Phillips and I'll be your host for today and tomorrow. For those of you who've never come across us before, we're a brand new e-learning startup. The format that we're offering you is an evolution in learning, broadcasting in-depth practical workshops lasting from a few hours to a few days, which you can watch here live online for free. The live format is also interactive, so you can ask questions via the live chat facility and feel involved in the class, even though you're watching online. You see, live streaming bridges the gap between actually being there in person with a teacher and learning online. It's real time and it's live. This workshop is called Tap into Emotional Freedom. And over the next 2 days, we'll be teaching you about tapping, which is also known as EFT or MTT. But this isn't just another tapping workshop, because we'll also be sharing insights with you about the subconscious, which are crucial to understand if you want to get maximum results from any kind of energy medicine. Our teachers for this workshop are self-development author and radio host Austin Wise, who studied the subconscious and tapping in great detail for many years. And helping Austin to explain these concepts is his co-author Dawn Bailey, a kinesiology practitioner and tutor who uses the information you're about to be exposed to with her clients and students and has achieved remarkable results. So don't forget, this workshop is live and interactive, which means that by using the chat facility you see on your screen, you can write in and ask Austin and Dawn your questions at any point during the show today and tomorrow. And of course, we'll do our best to get as many of your questions answered as possible. If you like what you see and hear, or perhaps don't have time to watch the full workshop now, you have the option to buy it by just pressing the green buy button on your screen. The 2-day workshop will then be yours to own and to watch time and time again. And by buying one of our workshops, you're also helping us to fund, create and broadcast many more free workshops, giving people from all walks of life access to free education that will ultimately enhance their lives. Okay, so let's get started. Our first session is all about the subconscious. Many new thinking experts are starting to believe that consciousness is the most important aspect of our lives, yet fully acknowledge that it's a neglected subject in scientific culture. Think about it. If we function from our subconscious 95 to 97% of the time, doesn't it make sense to understand more about this powerhouse of innate wisdom that's installed inside each and every one of us? So before Austin and Dawn begin to teach you the process of tapping, you'll find out here what the subconscious actually is, how it's programmed, and how we can release redundant behaviours, beliefs and attitudes from it. This information is crucial to understand if you want to get meaningful and long-lasting results from any form of energy medicine. Austin and Dawn.
Thank you, Jo. Well, who is this workshop for? Well, of course, it's for every one of us, because every one of us has a subconscious. And it's really important to get the best results out of everything we do is to know that we can gain access and change the programming that's in the subconscious. So think about it. If we operate from the subconscious in excess of 95% of the time, doesn't it make sense to have ready access? Well, we operate so little from our conscious brain, from our conscious mind, that we aren't as efficient as we could be. So today and tomorrow we're going to show you wonderful ways of gaining access to the subconscious. Now, think about it. The most important part of every human being's development is the first few years of life. So we're thinking about from birth to 6 particularly. Because from birth to 6, we are in the imprint period. And the imprint is exactly what it says. We are imprinting into that baby, into that child's brain, into their subconscious. Now this is important because there's no filters at that stage. The little child developing doesn't say, oh, I like that, I'll absorb it. I don't like that, I won't absorb it. It absorbs absolutely everything, whether it's good or bad, whether it's positive or negative. Now to really show you this in a very fun way, I'd like to ask you all a question. A question that you probably will have never been asked before. So are you right-thumbed or are you left-thumbed? Now, if you've never been asked that before, you think, what does that mean? But let's have a little game here and have a bit of fun with it. And everybody's involved, everybody's invited into this. What I'd like you to do is to clasp your hands tightly together. Every one of us, clasp our hands tightly together. And I'd like you to monitor how it feels. Now, what I'd like you to do is to keep your hands together, but reverse your thumbs. Now, how does that feel? It feels different, doesn't it? It feels awkward. And the point of this little silly game is to show you that your subconscious made the decision how you clasp your hands together. It wasn't a conscious decision. So your subconscious knew which thumb went on top, but consciously you wouldn't have known that. So that's really a silly little game, but it's so important. I think that can help us have clarity that the subconscious is really programmed so powerfully without us having conscious awareness of it. Now, if you think of that little developing child, and I'm sure most parents will recognize that you're talking to a friend or another family member, and your little child is playing there, and you think they're paying no attention. And later on, they quote you word for word. And that's because they are operating at a much lower brain frequency, and they're absorbing information. And it's important for the child to be able to absorb information at a very fast and powerful rate. And the reason for that is our survival. We need to gain information as quickly as we can, without any filters of thinking that's good or that's bad. So imagine what that developing child learns within the first 6 years of life. So you're thinking, well, from birth to 6-7, it's not a hard and fast ends at 6, but that child is absorbing stimuluses every single day. And as I've said a moment ago, it's in the child's best interest to absorb a lot of information, because it is always to do with survival. Now, at that stage, the child doesn't know what to do with all the information it's absorbing. That comes later. And of course, what comes later is what eventually begins to show the things that perhaps we've learnt that we shouldn't have learnt, that haven't been in our best interest. There are things we want to change. Perhaps we've developed fears and anxieties. Perhaps we grew up in a family unit that was full of stress. Perhaps even aggressive family environment, a violent family environment. And perhaps even a good family environment, but the messages that the developing child was receiving wasn't always positive. And you can grow up in a very stable background, but even something like the child being exposed to a comment from a parent, "Oh, is that the marks you got? Oh, very well done." Well, of course, the child's learning that something isn't acceptable about that. Perhaps I haven't done as well as I should have done in my parents' eyes. Now, parents, and it usually is parents, play the most important role in this development of the newborn and up to the age of 6-7. Because what happens when we are born, the first thing we do, and we're hardwired, by the way, in the brain, we are hardwired to look for a connection. And that connection is to do with our survival again, our safety. So think about it. We are bonding, that little child is bonding with the parents. Irrespective of who the parents are, the child is bonding. Now, of course, parents are expressing their acceptance of the child, unconditional love, or maybe conditional love. And that child is learning how to function in this world, very often through messages that aren't always good. So think about it. The language of parents is usually the language of love, because we are living beings who need love for our best chance of survival. If we understand love, we can connect more clearly with our emotions, which are stored in our subconscious. And so that child is looking for that acceptance. And then it begins to operate in a different way. It begins to follow the parents' examples. It doesn't consciously know that. Of course it doesn't, because it's operating from the subconscious. So just give that a little thought, and I'd like you to consider this from this moment, because that really is crucial to what we're going to do over the next couple of days. We're going to show you ways into the subconscious. So think about the child who perhaps, let's say there's a child there and it hasn't developed a conscious ability yet. So that would certainly be before the age of 6. And that little child sees a spider. And it might pick the spider up and start to play with the spider. It's fascinated with the spider, the movement of the spider. And an adult comes along and says, oh, put that down, that's dangerous, that's dirty, whatever. Now, of course, that makes no sense to that developing child. It thinks, well, it has no perception of being in fear of the spider. Now, of course, that child can see a spider every day, and it doesn't really consider the spider at all. But as the child develops, and it begins to develop the conscious brain, the conscious mind, where reason and logic fits in, it begins to develop anxieties, because the reason and logic brain says, oh, this is about fight or flight. What do I do? This is fearful. But remember that the seed was sown way back when that child first was, if you like, warned by its parent or a significant adult that you mustn't play with that spider. And that becomes a fear, a phobia. Now, to take that one stage further, think about the adult who has that fear of spiders, and you say to that adult, oh, don't be silly, it's only a spider. Well, that will make no difference, because the child has grown into an adult and it has reason and logic tells it that it makes no sense to have the fear of the spider. But the fear and the anxiety was embedded in the little child. That's its program. And that's the program it's operating from. So that example of a spider, I hope, gives you a bit of an insight into why we focus on the subconscious and the programs that are laid down there. And remember, if we think, oh, well, as we get older and we begin to develop reason and logic, we can address those issues. Well, no, not very easily, because it is a subconscious program. It's as simple as that. So if every one of us can spend some time today, tomorrow, the day after, in fact, from this point on, thinking about how we behave and where those patterns of behavior may well have been imprinted. And that's what we call them, the imprint. They've been imprinted into that little child growing up. But of course, because those behaviors are imprinted into the subconscious, we don't always have that conscious awareness. So we begin to act out those learnt behaviors. We begin to speak the language of the subconscious. We begin to speak the language of fear or aggression. So this is really important, and I'd really like you all to really focus on that. And again, just for a moment, think back to the little exercise where, you know, are you left-thumbed or are you right-thumbed? And of course, you know, that you've never been asked that question. But what can we do to change those programs which are no longer serving us well? Well, we have some wonderful new techniques now that we haven't had at our disposal before. And we're going to be taking you through tappings later and giving you demonstrations. But what I want to really emphasize here is that as we begin to gain access to the subconscious, I want you to have real clarity in the truth of this, which is that there's never any danger when we access the subconscious, because you're going to be learning how to do it in your way. And the wonderful thing about the techniques that we're going to be showing you is that you can learn them for yourself. There'll be one or two exceptions which I will be guiding you through, but you can learn how to access your subconscious. So the subconscious, again, think about it in terms of 95%. And if we're operating from that conscious mind, 5% of the time, we could argue that that's not very productive. Because, well, another example of that would be people who drive. You can get into your car, you can take a journey, and you get to your destination, you don't remember it, because you've traveled back into your subconscious. Now, people ask me frequently, isn't that dangerous? Well, no, it's not, because you're in fact, some research in America about 20 years ago showed that that is actually a very safe state. It shows that your responses is even quicker when you're in that subconscious thinking pattern. And if you gain more access to that, you'll find through the tapping process, as I said, which we're going to show you, is that will become more natural to you. It'll become part of your life. And once it becomes part of your life, then that's when the real power begins to happen. That's when the changes really begin to happen. So the subconscious, it really is the starting point of everything we're going to do over the next couple of days. And we want you to have real access to it. So is there any questions from the studio? No questions so far? Okay. Joe, over to you.
While you were talking there, Austin, I was thinking a little bit about estate agents who say, location, location, location. And for you, when it comes to energy medicine, or anything else actually, it's subconscious, 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 isn't it?
It is, because what we're doing is, again, there's so much power in the subconscious, but we just don't realize it, because we've grown up thinking that everything has to be reason and logic. Our education system, which I think is very good, but again, it doesn't teach people these things. And remember that large organizations, in fact small organizations, they spend millions upon millions and millions of pounds on plant and machinery. But if they realize that they could make incredible use of their people, using their people more efficiently, then what they could achieve is endless.
I wanted to pick up on what you said as well about there's never any danger in accessing the subconscious. That's not to say you shouldn't take extreme care with it. Is that right?
Yes, you should always take extreme care. And again, we're going to be talking about trauma later on. And sometimes you can uncover trauma, and that's where you need professional guidance. Having said that, you can tap, just imagine if you could tap for exam nerves, or just be more efficient at something in everyday life. Perhaps even an attitude. You think, why do I behave that way? And gaining access to the subconscious, you can change those programs, sometimes without even knowing what the original program was.
And this is probably going off subject a little bit, but I think it's still worth asking. We've talked about the subconscious, but a lot of people might be familiar with the collective unconscious as well. That's a different thing, isn't it? But still worth mentioning.
Well, it is, because if we think, and this may be a new concept for people, about the collective, if you like, unconscious, the collective subconscious, well, think about it. If we have a thought, it's not just in here, it radiates way beyond us. And we don't yet know how far it radiates. So if every one of us functions this way, which undoubtedly we do, then amazing power is out there. But again, science often thinks, oh, well, we can't measure that, so it doesn't exist. And I think that's slowing our progress. I really do feel that.
A good example of that, I suppose, is when people have the same thought, isn't it? And they say, oh, I was just thinking that. Or if, you know, you're thinking of a friend and then suddenly your friend rings you up. Or if you've got somebody in mind and then you're walking through town and you see them. That's the collective unconscious at work, isn't it? And the subconscious in unison.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And I would imagine most people have had those experiences. And some people just say, oh, well, that's just coincidence. But if I take those experiences for me in my life, they've happened consistently throughout my life, so consistently that it's more than just a coincidence. But may I say, coincidence is actually a mathematical equation, but it's more than a coincidence that that happens. And if we open ourselves up to this truth, because to me it's very much a truth, then again, I'll say it, we can change anything.
Is it worth at this point mentioning the book? Because if people want, it's a lot to absorb if you haven't, if you haven't come across the subconscious before. It's an awful lot to take in. But there is a chapter in the book which talks a lot about it in detail, isn't there?
Yeah, the first book, Without the Woo-Woo, chapter 4 talks about the subconscious in more detail, how it's programmed. But again, during these 2 days, we'll be giving you more information. And also, just to say, the woo-woo means that it has some science in there as well. So don't think it's anything but it's soft science and it's gentle science, because my background is in science, so I want to give people a gentle introduction.
And as I say, this whole workshop today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the subconscious and how to access it. Austin's going to be doing some tapping demonstrations. We've also got meditations coming up for you as well. And the meditations are really important as well when it comes to accessing the subconscious, aren't they?
Yes.
They're key.
People, again, I'll be talking about this again, but people think, oh, meditation, that's a bit strange, isn't it? But it isn't, because meditation is allowing ourselves to have a space between what we're doing. So it gives us access to our thoughts at a deeper level. And that's how all creative people work. They gain access to that creative part of themselves.
Okay, well that's the end of our first session, which is called The Power of the Subconscious. A quick tip, never go driving with Austin, because that's how he works out how you're operating subconsciously. Okay, on the way next we're going to be teaching you how to tap, but before that we're going to take a quick break. So now's the time to make yourself a quick drink, but please don't be too long, because as I say, we're going to be taking you through the first of our tapping demonstrations later on. We've got guided meditations as well, so we'll see you in 10.